Hey, what's going on, Giants and Jets fans? Welcome to the latest episode of our Giants and Jets Talk is Cheap podcast from NJ Advanced Media, the Star Ledger, and NJ.com. Daryl Slater here, Andy Vasquez joining me in a minute, our Jets writer, of course. And so it's Wednesday evening, January the 10th, and what a January the 10th it was. At about 8 o'clock at night, and a lot to digest. Obviously, we'll get into all the Giants and Jets stuff, all the Wink Martindale things, everything related to Aaron Rodgers and that soap opera, putting a bow on the eventful parts of this end of season week here. Um, Coaching staff changes, lack of coaching staff changes with the Jets, and where these teams go from here with things like well, especially with Saquon Barkley for the Giants in particular. Obviously today around the NFL, Pete Carroll basically pretty much nudged out in Seattle, and then another coaching legend, certainly one of the best coaches of all time, Alabama. Coach Nick Saban retires. So really right now in the NFL, obviously Saban is a college coach, but that's a huge bit of news. So a couple guys north of 70 calling it quits, and we know that Robert Saleh and Brian Dable will be back, but the NFL has seven openings right now. So Atlanta, Carolina, Vegas, the Chargers, Seattle, the Titans, and Washington. So those are the openings right now in the NFL, and as they kind of pertain to the Giants, we'll tie those in a little bit because there are a couple tie-ins there. So um, I mean, if you guys have been paying attention, you all know what's happened here over the last couple days. I mean, the Giants and Jets wrapped up their seasons on Sunday with right, the Jets won in New England. They snapped their streak, their losing streak to the Patriots. The Giants beat the Eagles, a rare win there as well. Mostly pretty meaningless and both hurt their draft status in terms of where they're going to pick in the first round. And then Monday came and it was an avalanche of news. And then Tuesday came and it was a lot of Rodgers stuff. And now Wednesday, finally, the negotiated divorce between Wink Martindale and the Giants. So, Andy, what do you make of this? This has been really since Sunday morning. You driving to Foxborough in a snowstorm. It's been nonstop here until Wednesday night.
Yeah, it's the end of the season, and at least on the Jets end, Wednesday was the first quiet day on this beat. It felt like in a long time. I know, we had a little break after the Cleveland game for New Year's, which was appreciated, but um, yeah, it's just been a lot of stuff, and I think a lot of stuff surrounding Aaron Rodgers, which is going to be real interesting next year because there's still a little bit of a honeymoon with him and some of the Jets fan base because of the potential of what he could mean for this team next year. But I think that will be a very short leash that is dependent on on-field success, and there's going to be no leeway. I just want to make it clear, like Jets fans are sick of it, and they don't care about anything other than results. And all of this defending of Rodgers will be a memory if he doesn't back it up on the field. So that's kind of a lot of noise, a lot of unnecessary noise. I'm sure we'll get into it, but it's just very rich for Rodgers to say that the Jets need to eliminate everything that has nothing to do with winning and flush the BS, while minutes earlier teasing his appearance on McAfee, which was an hour and 15-minute disaster. Um,
Oh
that
man.
had nothing. It was just, yeah. And I'm not even trying to be. I don't have any like people who want to talk about the media and whatever our opinions. I don't care about any of his past. Like I care about like what's relevant to what's happening on the football field. The COVID stuff was relevant a couple of years ago because it literally affected your status in terms of how long you would be off the roster, et cetera. It's not relevant anymore. So I don't care what his opinions were and all that. Um, he has been a distraction. I don't think it was anything that affected him in the locker room because he wasn't playing, but that'll be a different story next year if he continues to be a distraction, and especially if they continue to lose. So it's not a good thing, and especially when this team, it's been made clear by Sauce Gardner on Monday, made clear by Rodgers, they need to eliminate the distractions and focus on doing what's important to winning. Rodgers was totally right when he said that, and totally wrong to end up, and I wrote about it today, totally wrong to end up going that route and creating, something that didn't make anybody, him or anybody else involved with the Jets, proud. I would say on
I
that.
mean,
And I
it
don't
was
think it's a huge deal, but like right now, but it's not good. What? Go
yeah, it
ahead.
was
Sorry.
yeah, and it was so bad, and then we'll move right on real quick to well, I'll just put a ball on. Well, we can get back to it, but it was so bad that Pat McAfee's like, we're good here," like,
Yeah.
and he announced that Aaron Rodgers won't be back on the show mercifully for the rest of the NFL season, and who knows beyond that. So, but I mean, I think you nailed it there when you said results is what it's about, and I think that's where Giants fans are at this point. The honeymoon with Brian Dable is over. Okay, and people understand that yes, this team is still rebuilding, and yes, there is a possibility they're going to be drafting a quarterback with a premium pick this year, even if it's not in the first round. It could be with one of those second round picks. It could be in a trade up movement to the bottom of round one. Um, but people want to see results. I mean, the team just went 6-11. They haven't beaten anybody like under Brian Dable. I mean, their record against good teams is atrocious. They are 5-17 in against teams that finished with a winning record. That includes their playoff win in Minnesota and 11-2-1 against teams with a losing or 500 record. Now, you're not really going to go anywhere in the NFL unless you beat some good teams, and they haven't beaten anyone good. Yeah, they finished the season with a win over the Eagles. Okay, and but people want to see some results here, and I understand, it's going to be some growing pains potentially if they have to start a young kid at quarterback. We'll see, and we'll get to that. But at this point, Brian Dable has made significant changes to his coaching staff, right? So here's what happened. We come out of Sunday, we go into Monday morning. Just a quick recap here because everyone knows what happens. Brian Dable goes into his press conference. Bobby Johnson, O-line coach, fired. Thomas McGahee, special teams coordinator, fired. Okay, no surprise there. Coming out of the press conference, Brian Dable gives the impression that he expects Wink Martindale and Mike Kafka to return, doesn't commit to Kafka, continuing to call the plays. Later Monday, news comes out, Drew Wilkins, the outside linebacker coach, right-hand man of Wink Martindale, to the toaster, fired. And then shortly thereafter, we hear the news that Wink Martindale has resigned. Okay, well, it took a couple days. He didn't actually submit his resignation, which smartly he didn't because the report then came out last night that there was a heated conversation. Well, really, that Wink Martindale cursed out Brian Dable when he said, "Look, we're going to fire Drew Wilkins." And what did Dable expect? I think if he really wanted to keep the guy, why would he fire his right hand man? So to me, it's like it comes off as a bit okay. You say you expect him back, and then you do something that kind of undercuts that statement. But ultimately, the end result was no surprise, considering the report about tension between these two guys during the season. Okay, so it's no surprise that Wink Martindale's gone. There was a little bit of drama along the way, a lot bit of drama, right, over these past few days. Um, and now the end result for Wink Martindale is this. He will not get his money from the Giants next year, but who cares? Because he's now free to go wherever he wants to go. He's not going to be a head coach this year. Forget that. Okay. But he could be a defense coordinator anywhere he wants to be, and that includes in Philadelphia. So he'll get paid handsomely for that. Just like he would have gotten paid handsomely with the Giants. So to me here, like there was a negotiated divorce, yes, but Wink Martindale didn't really have to concede much. And now he could be the Eagles DC next year, which could wind up really biting the Giants if they don't find a way to, number one, improve their own offense, but also get a really competent guy to replace him. Would that be like a Matt Patricia or maybe Antonio Pierce if he doesn't get the Raiders head coaching job? Could they lure Patrick Graham back? Remember, he was going to be the guy before Wink Martindale. So I think this kind of ties into something as we look ahead here, and is Brian Dable didn't have a relationship with Wink Martindale. He had one with Patrick Graham from their Pats days. He has one with Matt Patricia from their Pats days. Lengthy relationship, right? Um, I don't know. I mean, what do you from the Jets' perspective? Comfortability, relationships matter, right? And then you see where Rodgers and Hackett being something that they said, okay, this marriage can work. But when you look at why things work or don't work, a lot of times in the NFL, especially in this case, like you just can't, when guys can't trust each other, it just doesn't work.
Yeah. I mean, this is probably like a juvenile comparison, but like, why not just fire him if clearly that is your intent by getting rid of his right hand guy? It's like saying you want to stay in a relationship
Right.
with a significant other and then doing things that aren't going to fly in that relationship. So you make the other person make that decision. It just makes it, first of all, like it reflects poorly on you, and it's the same result anyway. They ended up having to fire him from a contractual standpoint, and he still has every availability or every option open to him that he would have if they had just fired him and
It's no different.
Dable didn't
Yeah.
take the PR, Dable just unnecessarily took a
Yeah.
PR hit from the way he handled it. So, I mean that it's not an easy job, like being the most public facing figure, as I can attest to watching Robert Saleh do it every day. It's very easy to make yourself look bad, and it's hard to manage, and that's the difference between being a coordinator and a head coach. And I think Dable has struggled with some of that stuff, and that's an example of it. Doesn't mean he can't figure it out. It doesn't mean it may not be the right move for the franchise in the meantime. But yeah, these things are hard, and yeah, we saw it with Hackett this whole year. Like Hackett was clearly not the right coordinator, and if you look at his history, he's never been the right offensive coordinator when Aaron Rodgers isn't his quarterback.
Yeah.
So, but the fact that Aaron Rodgers is going to be his quarterback next year, at least, that's if everything goes as planned, that's why you keep him around, and it creates this whole awkward situation. And we've seen evidence of the awkwardness throughout the season and on Baggy Day for the Jets as well, based on some of the comments of the players. And they have their own issues that we'll get into. One of their assistant coaches is also getting their offensive line coach Keith Carter. When Vrabel got fired, Lewin he put a post on Instagram that he loved playing for Vrabel except for 1 year in 2018, and loved all of his assistants except for Keith Carter, the offensive line coach in Tennessee, who joined the Jets this year after getting fired. And then you see Jets players either liking it or commenting on it and deleting it, and that shows that there's dysfunction within the Jets, and they might. I mean, I think that's the only major coaching change they're going to make is potentially getting rid of Keith Carter. So, yeah, it's hard. It's all hard to manage.
Especially when you're losing, and winning covers up a lot of these
Yep.
problems and a lot of this drama. And this kind of reminds me a little bit of the Adam Gase Greg Williams divorce from a couple of years ago, from 4 years ago, right, or 3 years ago, December of
Yeah.
2020, after the cover zero. And you're talking about a
Oof.
DC who clearly has had success. Number one, we know that, but thinks very, very highly of himself as Greg Williams. I don't know if anyone has as big of an ego as Greg Williams, but Wink certainly has a big one. And the results were not there for Greg Williams. And quite frankly, the results have not lived up to the name for Wink Martindale. I mean, just look at where they are in PFF. And I understand that they were number one in the league, tied for first in the league in takeaways this year, which counts special teams takeaways. But of course, most of those are on defense. So they get credit for that, certainly. But they had certainly their share as well of just some defensive duds. And overall, they were not a well-rated, if you just look at PFF, not a well-rated team defensively over the last couple of years, nor on offense. Okay. And then this is why they were the worst team in the league in PFF this year, 32nd last. Okay. So that just goes to show how much of a rebuild they have to do here. But look, the end result here with Wink Martindale and Brian Dable is not surprising, but now the pressure is squarely on Brian Dable. I mean, for Wink Martindale, he's playing with house money. He's going to coach somewhere this year, you'd think, right? And if he doesn't, so what? He doesn't make any money. He's made a lot of money. Okay, so it doesn't really matter. But his options are wide open. He can go wherever he wants, and it'll be fascinating to see if maybe that's the Eagles, because if the Eagles lose Monday in Tampa, all options are on the table, including a full house cleaning, I think. And the thing to remember with the Eagles too is Sean Desai is their defensive coordinator, and he was demoted from Matt Patricia. Okay, so if Brian Dable wants to hire Matt Patricia as his defensive coordinator, I'm under the impression here that the Eagles can't block that because Patricia's not the DC. He's a senior defensive assistant. Okay, so if they wanted to hire Sean Desai, which I can't imagine they would because the guy basically just got fired, then they could block that, the Eagles. Not that they would because they fired him. But the point remains, the Patricia, the title situation with Patricia makes him vulnerable to a plucking. The Eagles can't just say, look, we're going to promote you. And maybe he would want to stay there in a promotion if Nick Sirianni stays. But that's the fascinating part of this. That's why the Eagles could be looking. Well, maybe they just go with a clean slate and they get rid of Patricia and Desai and they go with a new DC under Sirianni and they make it Wink Martindale. The thing here to remember too, Bob Brookover, who used to cover the Giants for us and now does the Eagles, mentioned how rarely the Eagles blitz, and Wink Martindale blitzes a ton. It would be interesting to see how that could work. That would be a huge, huge change from what they do, unless Wink Martindale would agree to not blitz as much, which I can't imagine. So the possibility here now is super juicy of him one way or the other, whether it's under a new coaching staff in Philly or the same one, landing there and just sticking it to Brian Dable because there are no restrictions with this negotiated divorce with Wink Martindale and the Giants. And that's what kind of makes this whole thing super fascinating at this point. But on the other hand, ton of pressure on Brian Dable. He needs a strong DC, right? I mean, like it's like with Robert Saleh. He needed someone. I mean, he's a defensive-minded coach, right? So he needed and the Jets' offense has been a disaster, right? So they needed someone to come and it wasn't Mike LaFleur, and he was kind of maybe scapegoated a little bit, but um, and it certainly has been Nate Hackett, and they're just hoping that the quarterback can be the OC and Aaron Rodgers essentially. But they needed someone to spark their offense, whereas the Giants need someone to pick up what the good things Wink Martindale did and make this defense more consistent. So would that be Matt Patricia, or would that maybe be Antonio Pierce or Patrick Graham, or someone along those lines, or maybe just someone lower profile? I mean, but here's my question for you. How attractive do you think that job is? You've covered a bunch of hot seat coaches here. We've seen it. This is a typical playbook thing for guys to make coaching changes to their staff entering a hot seat year. Dable's on the hot seat. He's so the pros and cons here are if you come in as a DC, it's your whole show, right? Essentially, right? You're working for an offensive minded coach, but you're also working for a hot seat coach who just went through a bitter, nasty divorce with the previous DC. So how do you weigh all that?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, and I'm sure you'll comment on this when I'm done, but we do know what Wink Martindale will be wearing no matter where he ends up, which I thought was that. Sorry, I had to make a little crack there since he
I've
wears
never
the
seen the
same
man's
outfit to the
forearm. Yeah.
airport. Maybe he's tatted up. I don't know. Sorry, but I think that job is interesting because it's a weird thing. Like that job it's a dangerous job to take unless the Giants are taking a quarterback in the draft, right?
Then you
Then
get
that would
stability. Yeah.
then Dable really probably is going to get at least 2 more years. So, I mean, if I'm interviewing for that job, it's a very attractive job because they have some good talented pieces on defense. Um, and I think like you can make that defense, pretty formidable as it was at times this year. The problem was the inconsistency, but I think the pieces are there to make that defense, stable. But it's going to be that's the first question you got to kind of ask, like, what are you guys doing at quarterback? Because I think that directly, you know, relates to the team's security, into the security of the coaching staff's future is what because you think Dable, an offensive minded guy who has a history of developing one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, who did not have a very good start to his career and then figured it out because of Dable and hasn't been as good since Dable left. Uh, I think that gives him a lot more stability if he's developing a quarterback. So I think I think they can attract pretty much anybody they'd want, but it does hinge on that. And I think maybe that will be kind of an early read. Like they're not going to publicly go out and say what they're going to do in the draft, but depending on the direction they go at DC, I think it could be kind of telling to what they are going to do in the draft.
That's a good point, right? I mean, that's a really interesting point, especially if whoever they're going after has other, defensive coordinator interest and that person picks the Giants over, say, another job. Whereas, maybe if the Giants are your only offer and you want to coach, are you going to turn it down because it's not perfect? Probably not. Another name to watch is Leslie Frazier, who is, he's older. He turned 65 in April, but of course he overlapped for 4 years in Buffalo with Dable as the DC there. And he was out of the NFL last year and didn't coach. And the Giants interviewed him for their head coaching job before they hired Dable. So a lot of familiarity with the organization with Dable, more so obviously with Dable, which is what matters. I mean, that's what matters here. I think ultimately, I don't know if Dable can go out and hire like another complete total stranger, big ego guy. I just don't know if that's going to work. Um, that's why I think a Frazier hire, Patricia, Pat Graham, someone that he has familiarity with. I guess maybe Antonio Pierce could work. I know he played for the Giants. Well, so what? I mean, just because he played for the Giants, it's about how he works with the man who is the coach of the Giants now, not with that effect that he
Yep.
played for the Giants 12 years ago or whatever it was. Who cares? I mean, there's this weird sentimentality attached to the Giants, like from, fans, obviously, but some of the people that cover the team, this weird nostalgia factor. But like, who cares that he played for the Giants? It doesn't have any impact on anything. Also, he's never been a defensive coordinator in the NFL, Antonio Pierce. So I mean, what gives you the? I mean, this guy is going to have to run the whole defense. It's not like the head coach, could step in and be like, you know what, I'm going to call the defensive plays, like throw a life raft, like maybe Dable will do with Mike Kafka here. No, so I don't know. I mean, the Pierce thing is interesting, I guess, but obviously there's certainly more qualified candidates out there. And before we'll pivot in a minute to Rodgers, but just to review real fast the nuts and bolts of where everything is at Giants wise right now as we talk. So Wink Martindale is out via a negotiated divorce. We'll see who they target. They have not done any interviews yet. The other defensive guys who are out via firing are the outside linebackers coach Drew Wilkins and his brother Kevin Wilkins, the defensive assistant. The running backs coach Jeff Nixon left to be Syracuse's OC. We knew that. So Bobby Johnson, the O-line coach, fired, and the Giants have or plan to at least interview the Raiders O-line coach Carmen Brasillo. They've gotten permission to do that amid the Raiders coaching search or figuring out whether Pierce is going to be their guy. And then the last one, the sixth opening right now on the Giants spot is his special teams coordinator Thomas McGahee. He fired, and the Giants were actually just denied an interview for Ryan Ficken, the Chargers special teams coordinator. So that would have been a lateral move. The Chargers said, we're figuring out who our coach is going to be, Jim Harbaugh. We cannot wait to see our pal Dan Popper go toe to toe with Jim Harbaugh, by the way. And the only other thing to watch is the assistant GM for the Giants, Brandon Brown. Panthers and Chargers want to talk to them for the GM, their GM jobs. Oh, and by the way, Mike Kafka, who may not call plays next year, Brian Dable kept that on the table, a yanking of the play calling duties to Titans for what it's worth. Want to talk to him for their head coaching job. He's not as hot of a candidate this year as he was last year, but that's one interview for him. So that's where things are at, and a lot of moving parts here for the Giants and the coaching staff, the comings, the potential goings, the goings that we know of, all that stuff. So you touched on it Jets wise. They didn't make any changes. Are you surprised that they did not make any changes?
I don't think it's done. I think there's going to have to be some change, but I don't think it'll be. I think Keith Carter is going to be the extent of it if there is a change, or maybe like they move on from Rob Calabrese, but like he's basically like the third quarterback coach at this point behind Rodgers. And like it's just not going to. You're not going to see a major move because clearly everything the Jets have done has smacked of well, things would have been different if Rodgers was healthy, as we've talked
Right.
about multiple times. So I'm not surprised. I mean, I just think it's a miscalculation in terms of, especially now that you're seeing like all of these changes going on around the league and just the attitude of this franchise that took it so personally and was so sensitive that anyone was daring to question the job status of Joe Douglas or Robert Saleh, despite the fact that they've combined for an 18-33 record
Yeah.
over the last 3 years. And Douglas's record, if you want to go back further than that, is even worse. So um, to me, it's just a miscalculation. Like you're seeing guys who have been far more successful than the Jets have ever been, like Vrabel, or in the last 15 years, like Vrabel, like obviously Pete Carroll getting forced out, and the Jets are just like, "Yep, we're good because Aaron Rodgers said so." And I think
Yeah.
that if it's a bad look, but am I surprised? No, but it is like kind of remarkable how the year the Jets are doing this, it's being almost thrown in their face that like every other team is making these risky decisions to get better, and the Jets, were taking no risk from that standpoint, even though they've had no success. So to me, that doesn't. It's not surprising, but it is revealing.
Uh, yes, I think it's pretty clear that they're just going to shrug off 2023, but their players are not, right? I mean, we heard Garrett Wilson, express quite a bit of frustration. For a guy even in year two, he realizes how finite an NFL career is, and you can't just throw away years. I feel like is kind of the vibe I got from what he said. What did you think?
Yeah, I thought to me, like, so what he said directly, or what he said was, "This can't happen again," and then called out basically, like, without calling out the offensive staff specifically, he called out the offensive staff by saying, like, we need to make adjustments during games, and we didn't, and we need to make adjustments when things don't happen. But in the same breath, he's saying, like, Aaron Rodgers fixes a lot of this. So the way I read it is that Garrett Wilson is saying like next year, if we lose Rodgers for some reason, we can't just have Nathaniel Hackett taking 10 games to figure out how to best use a quarterback who is different than him. And
Yep.
we can't be a historically bad, like he's not willing to basically go out there undermatched every game just because Aaron Rodgers got hurt. And that's to me is what it was. Because like you can't say those two things in the same answer. He said basically like having Aaron Rodgers back fixes a lot of this stuff. Yes, but this can't ever happen again. So to me, it's like what we saw from Nathaniel Hackett this year was not good enough for him because it was a wasted year of his career. And the Jets and the most telling thing he said is I watch other teams on the sideline and it doesn't seem this hard.
That's
Other
what a
offenses.
quote.
Yeah. And it's not the
Why is
first
it
time he
so
said it.
hard? Why
Yeah.
is it
And
so
it's not
hard? Is he summed up, life as a Jet fan. Why is this so hard?
exactly. And it's not the first time he said it. I think he said it after the Raiders game. And it shouldn't be this hard when you have Garrett Wilson and you have Brees Hall and you saw, I mean, it was a little bit insane, not a little bit, it was a lot insane. The Jets let Brees Hall touch the ball 39 times, including a career high 37 rushing attempts in a meaningless game on a snowy, icy field, you know,
But they
14
wanted him
months
to get to
after he
a
tore his
thousand
ACL.
yards, and he got there. Oh
He got
wait,
almost. But the fact that first of all he didn't get hurt and like that's a good sign. And then it also I think it was like important for them to beat the Patriots and all of that, and because they don't have to talk about it anymore, even if it hurt their draft stock, whatever. There's no guarantee that it's not a good thing for them that they move back the draft spots in the end. Like I understand from a draft value standpoint, it is what it is, and it hurt them. But I think this can be like a jumping off point for them. And I'm not a big like building momentum guy, but I just think it shows two things. Like this offense can be very good. It has the players that you can, Garrett Wilson getting over 1,000 yards, Brees Hall getting 1,500 yards, all purpose for the year. It shows that this year should have never happened. It shows that they can be a force as an offense. It shows that Brees Hall, who the week before said like it's not going to be like this forever, like I'm going to come back and be a beast next year. For him to back it up, something this Jets team has a real problem with doing, like that's what they need more of. So I think all that was good, but it also shows like this has not been good enough. This is unacceptable. You cannot be a historically bad offense. You cannot be the worst offense in the NFL when you have Brees Hall and Garrett Wilson on your offense, no matter what happens. And I think that's a really good message from Garrett Wilson. And it's different from like Jamal Adams, when Jamal Adams was always in his comments, not looking to take personal accountability, not looking to like win with his team. He was looking for a way out. Garrett Wilson may end up having to take a way out if the Jets don't deliver victories for him and don't deliver a functional offense. But it's clear like he's like, I have to get better too, and I want it to work here. That's not like that's a big difference. So it's not like
yeah,
Garrett Wilson's looking for a way out. He's begging this team to be better and saying and showing that he's all in on this team. And I think like Sauce Gardner said too, like I want to be more accountable, I'm going to call out the things I don't agree with because I know how to win next year. And I think, while also saying that he believes in the coaching staff, I think it just shows that like even the players in a way are putting the coaching staff on notice because they know that what
good.
happened this year was not good enough.
Yeah, I mean Adams is a clown. We all know that. We've seen it time
Yeah.
and again this year. And so the Jets, of course, last in PFF and offense, worst offense in the league. Giants, second worst offense in the league this year. So we're not going to go through every pending free agent, blah blah blah, and all that stuff because we'll do these sporadically throughout the offseason. Might take depending on what happens here news wise, take some time. We're not going to necessarily do these every week, but in terms of where the Jets, and we know Garrett Wilson's going to be back, obviously. But in terms of the personnel, we talked quite a bit about the coaching staffs here and just sort of the general attitude and aura around these teams and that they, we've got to improve type thing. And the urgency certainly for the Jets. But as you look at their, and we'll get into Saquon Barkley in a minute, but that's what I'm tying this into. What are their big decisions in terms of their in-house guys? Bryce Huff and anyone else?
No, it's really like you say Quentin Jefferson is a big one to watch too because
Yeah,
he was one of the few guys they signed and it was good. But it's mostly like Zach Wilson, but I think we all know how that's going to work out and no
goodbye.
need to invest too much time. Yeah, it's not going to be here. when Aaron Rodgers is getting up there and saying like maybe a change of scenery wouldn't be bad, I think you know where that's going. And just for posterity, I'm going to say UCF is up by 6 on Kansas with 11 minutes left, and I'm going to enjoy that while I can. But
You know,
um, yeah, I didn't expect that. But I think Bryce Huff is clearly the one guy, and it's going to be really tough for them to keep him. First of all, his value is hard to project because he's a guy who plays about 40% of the snaps a game, which is a lot in the Jets rotation, but not a lot for other teams where, defensive ends usually will play or edge rushers will play double that. He's statistically bad against the run, but then also he has like the best analytical numbers in terms of get off on the edge and quarterback pressure numbers. Like he's a beast. So he's probably going to be looking for an opportunity to play more snaps in another defense. But it's like tricky, like what's his value going to be? And I think like it could very easily rise above 16, 17, 18 in APY.
mm.
And once it gets above 16, it's going to be very hard for the Jets to justify keeping him because they're set at edge rusher. I mean, they were so set at edge rusher this year that Carl Lawson, they paid him $9 million to play 6 games and make 5 tackles, like 1.9 million per tackle this year. They
Well, they
they
got
they have
Johnson
too
from
many edge
Myers,
rushers.
right?
Yeah,
And
JFM. They've
Jermaine
got Will
Johnson.
McDonald, who they drafted 15th overall. Um, and Jermaine Johnson also has emerged as a very like probably the best edge rusher on the team. And I think the most complete edge rusher on the team. Even like more than Huff for sure. And he's younger and still under. So like they have too many other needs on the offensive line. They need to get a big time receiver in here to pair with Garrett Wilson because Alan Lazard has been a disaster.
Devontae
So
Adams.
I think that's going to be really tough to do. But with his the Raiders, there's like really no incentive for them to trade him because they're going to eat so much on the cap and the Jets really aren't in a position because they only have 5 picks in this year's draft, including just one in the first 60 or plus because of the trade for Rodgers. So it makes more sense for them to throw money at Evans from Tampa or something than to do that. But they have to preserve their money for a move like that or again, where they're drafting now, they're drafting 10th. If they had lost, they would have been drafting 6th ahead of the Giants, where the Giants are drafting now. So now that's not an easy place that there's no guarantee that you're going to get one of those top tackles in the draft. So you have to probably address that in free agency, which makes it harder to address your receiver problem in free agency. Like again, all of it adds up to it's going to be very tough for them to keep Bryce Huff if another team is going to pay. And everybody wants to talk about like, well, they could tag him and trade him, but like, okay, that doesn't really work because if they sign him for the franchise tag, which is plus 20 plus million for an edge rusher, and then he decides not to sign the tag until like right before the last
Yeah,
minute before the season,
right.
they can't trade him.
Risky. Yeah, and it
And you're
eats
not
up
going
all
to
the
get
cap
anything of
space.
value. So
Yeah,
like it's
yeah.
not this
The
isn't
tag
like
is
some
not
slam.
ideal.
Yeah, this isn't the NBA, guys. Like everybody thinks that it's a no-brainer. They should do that. And except they already missed the window. They needed to extend them before the season or early in the season. Maybe he wasn't receptive to it. It's hard to
Why would
know
he
because you're
be?
not going to get.
Go hit
Yeah,
the
why
open
would he be?
market.
Yeah, so um, yeah, I just think that's the writing on the wall. They're not in a position where they can overpay to keep him,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's them's the breaks. But that's where they're at.
Yeah, and the Giants, of course, are 6 in the draft. If they had lost to the Eagles, they only could have stayed at 5. So they dropped one spot because they didn't get any help from the teams in front of them. So that's in terms of the Jets, they finished 6 in PFF and pass rush, and you're talking about, the that being obviously a big strength of their team, and Bryce Huff being a big strength of that strength, and the pressures. Quinton Williams had 70, Huff had 67, Jermaine Johnson 56, Franklin Myers 50. Will McDonough had only 12. Obviously, McDonough, my goodness. I don't know if any people are going to even get that Freudian slip there. Will McDonald, RIP Will McDonough, great sports writer. But when Will McDonald, didn't didn't get a lot of opportunity. So he'll have to step up, obviously. And they got a lot out of Jermaine Johnson. They'll need more from him. And yeah, that's their big decision, as you said. And you raise a good point that kind of ties into where the Giants are at with the franchise tag. It's not ideal. It's not ideal to use it every offseason. Joe Shane said as much. And I wonder, you can't help but wonder, hearing that, does that point to a Saquon Barkley departure? I don't know if they'll tag Xavier McKinney for $17 million, especially when That's going to eat up a good chunk of the Giants cap space. Right now they're at 33. I think if they, make some cuts, Mark Lewinsky's a goner. Maybe they get close to 40, but 17 almost eats up about half that, or a little less than half that, right? 40% probably. So McKinney's a fascinating, foundational player type because he didn't have a good 2022 season. He was really good in 2021. He was really good in 2023. And so what do you expect from him? Is he trending upward? It would seem so. So that's a big decision the Giants have to make. The other one, of course, and we're talking non-quarterbacks decisions. Obviously, the draft is going to be what it's going to be. But the other big decision for the Giants is obviously Saquon Barkley. Yeah, it just seems like everything is trending toward them letting him walk. And the thing to remember with Huff when you talk about tag and trade, well, I know the Jets are a win now team, so they're not thinking about 2025 comp picks, but they could get a pretty good comp pick for him if he does walk, depending on how active they are in free agency. And the same thing for Barkley. But obviously Jet fans are looking at it like, look, we're trying to win it all with Aaron Rodgers or get to the Super Bowl this year. Who cares about a comp pick? I get that. But in terms of the Giants and their pending free agents, McKinney being the big one, Adoree Jackson, he's gone. There's no way he's back. Deontay Banks, they drafted him to be the number one corner, and that's the deal. He's going to be that. And we'll see how he fares. He didn't have a great year this year. Saquon Barkley, of course, as I said, winding back to what I was saying there, is the only other really super intriguing pending in-house free agent for the Giants other than Xavier McKinney. So what do they do? I mean, do they tag him again at $12 million and wind up committing about 22 million to him for 2 years here last year and this year, or do they let him walk? And I just think that if you're going to draft, I probably said this around here. I know I've written it. If you're going to draft a quarterback and start over, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to invest heavily in a 27-year-old running back who's had durability issues and do it for 1 year, right? I mean, Barkley could be like, okay, fine, I'll play under the tag again. The bottom line is he knows, and he said it. This is it. This is his chance to hit true free agency. If the Giants somehow lock him up and he plays into the tag again, it'd be crazy. I mean, they would have controlled him for 7 years. I don't see it happening. I think he walks. I think they allocate the resources elsewhere, which is smart. And they finally get out from by all accounts, a great citizen, has had great moments. No one's saying he's a bad guy. It was a bad pick. We all know that. Okay. That's no fault of his own. The GM who drafted him was freaking inept and ruined the roster. Okay. So we all know this. But they're finally going to move out from under a bad decision that, quite frankly, they did not double down on with a second contract because he got hurt in 2020. And that's what happened in year three. If he hadn't gotten hurt, he would never have been here. He would have gotten paid. He would have gotten that second contract. But that's how, unfortunately, it works. And so, yeah, no, I think he moves on. And we talk about Wink Martindale to Philly, Saquon Barkley to Philly. Ooh, that would be juicy, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that would be cool to see, and not for Giants fans, but I think just for NFL fans in general, just some of these potentially juicy storylines. And when you look at the Eagles, they are a team that, like, no matter what happens in the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, however you want to play it out, if you think they can make a run, um, however that plays out, they're going to potentially need a guy like him to help carry the load and stabilize things on offense with them being kind of exposed this year, uh, with teams finding a way to kind of take away Hurts Hurts's running ability. So I think, I mean, he would make a lot of sense, and I think that's the thing that, like, because Saquon has been such a popular player in terms of the locker room and in the fan base by doing and saying the right things, like, doesn't mean it's not the right decision for the Giants to move on from him, given where they are as a roster. I mean, there are arguments for him to stay too, but I do think, like, it just sometimes it just makes sense, and that's not a reflection on Saquon and who he is as a player, a person. That it wasn't. It's just when you pick a running back second overall, you're going to have to be Barry Sanders to justify it, basically, right? So it's
100%.
not,
Yeah.
it's not a knock on Saquon that he's a potential one day maybe a Hall of Fame famer. Um, that he's not that. it just wasn't the right pick at the right time for the Giants. And again, like you said, it's kind of a weird. There is some weird nostalgic stuff. The Jets have it too, not as much because there's just never really been any success. But yeah, I mean, you see what he's still capable of, and it just makes sense for where the Giants are at, probably for it to be elsewhere, at least from an external standpoint of someone who isn't looking at it as closely as you.
Yeah, I mean, look, it does. I mean, they drafted him to be a difference maker and they went 25-41. They went in the regular season, they went 25-48 and 1 in games he played in. 25-48 and 1 in games he played in. Okay. So that now he's not the reason for that solely, of course, but yeah,
It's just a
no.
misjudgment, yeah,
You,
of what your roster needed.
you don't pay a 27-year-old running back a lucrative second contract or a second tag in a row when you're drafting a quarterback. And I understand that, they're number 6 in the draft and they're behind um, Chicago, Washington, New England. Quarterbacks go one, two, three. I don't know if Arizona will pick quarterback. We know the Chargers won at 5, but the three main quarterbacks, Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, could be gone by number 6, right? And so, I mean, Giants can't trade up into a top 3, 4 quarterback if one of those teams wants to also take a quarterback. And the Giants are not trading from 6 to 1. Okay. So they may have to wait until the second round to get a quarterback, but that would still be a significant investment in a premium pick quarterback and signal that you're kind of sort of heading in the direction of wanting to like restart with that guy. And so you don't pay heavily for a 27-year-old running back in that situation. I mean, that's something a win now team does, which is the Eagles, right? I mean, they're trying to win with Jalen Hurts, and that's why you've seen that kind of chatter. And I think Saquon Barkley, it's pretty clear he would embrace. I mean, the guy is straight up said he would embrace a fresh start. I mean, if they do not tag him, I don't think that he gets. I do not think that they're going to blow him away with a contract offer, right? So let's just set that aside. So maybe they give him some kind of offer that he views as limp. He's going to tell him to pound sand and he's going to hit free agency. Like, so he's basically made it clear, like either have to tag me or blow me away with an offer, which they're not going to do. They're not going to blow him away with an offer. So they said they have to tag him is what he's saying, or farewell, essentially. I mean, you don't see a lot of guys go out and test the market and then come back. It just doesn't typically happen.
Yeah.
Um, so there's 31 other teams out there, right? One team isn't going to, the odds are that what are the odds that your one team is going to pay you or that one of the other 31 is going to pay you? It just has to take one who's paying you more than this one team, right? So someone's going to, because other teams are in much different situations in terms of winning now than the Giants. And that's what's going to happen. He's going to sign with one of those teams and good for him. He'll realize what his current market value is now. He'll never max it out. He never would have maxed it. I mean, look, unfortunately for him, the ship has sailed on getting it the true peak of his market value. Just not happening. Nature of the position, his age, the fact he didn't have a really good year this year, not all in his control, obviously, durability. So yeah. Um, by the way, we're talking career records. Leonard Williams' career record in the regular season is
Oh,
50. It's 50, 91, and 1. 50, 91, and 1.
man,
He's
I would
as
imagine
almost
that's
he's almost as many games under 500 as he is games that he's won. He's 41. Well, I guess a tie, right? 41. Yeah, 41 games under 500, and he's 150. Right? I mean, man. And he went to Seattle. And that ties into what we were talking about with the draft because the Giants have the extra second round pick from Seattle. Seattle did not make the playoffs. Unfortunately for Leonard Williams, he didn't get back there. That pick now doesn't fall into the playoff pool of picks, right? That's worth remembering here. Like Seattle makes the playoffs. That pick goes all the way to the bottom of the round in round 2. Right now, not to the way bottom, but right now it's the 47th pick. And that's what it's going to be. It's the 47th pick. So the Giants pick at 6, 39, 47, and 70. That's where they're at. The Jets are at 10, nothing in the second round because of the Rodgers trade, and then 72. So obviously the Jets are pinched a little bit. And you mentioned it earlier in regard to the Devontae Adams potential trade. So yeah, no, I mean that's certainly a lot to think about going into this offseason. Um, but the immediate stuff is, what are these coaching staffs going to look like? We know what the Jet staff is going to look like, right? I mean, I guess my question to you then, with that, amid all this Giants coaching staff change, drama, and all that. So what happens if they come out next year and the offense is struggling like early on? Like, is there any way they can make some kind of change where Hackett gets basically neutered and they have is it Todd Downing, right?
Yep.
Call the plays. Do you see that? Do you see would Rodgers green like that, or would it matter if he green lighted it? It shouldn't matter, right?
I was laughing, first of all, just to go back to what you said about Leonard Williams' career record. I'm just going back and looking at my career record since I started covering the Jets. And
Oof.
it's like, I think, but if my quick math is correct, it's something like 41 and 90. So that's hard to hard to believe. That is, more under 500 than wins, but or whatever. Like it's just maybe my math is wrong. Or 40, yes, it's either way. It's really bad. But yeah, I mean there are ways. I mean, I think for any public acknowledgement or public moving on from Hackett is probably going to take Rodgers getting hurt or the Jets making it clear like benching him if he plays that badly. And like
Mm.
I will say, like out of all the insane things that Aaron Rodgers said in the last 48 hours or
Yeah, and we haven't even touched on it, so this is a
plus.
good time to get into it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I don't honestly we'll just stick to the football stuff, I guess. But because I mean I don't I'm just so tired of wasting energy on him when so much of this is like not stuff that people in the locker room or people in the fan base care about.
Well, I think you hit it on the head with the locker room, right?
Yeah, like earlier on, like it's just what's gonna matter for him. But like one of the things he said, and I don't know if it was disingenuous or not, probably was, but he said we're all in the hot seat because if I want to play multiple years here, but to do that, I have to play well in 2024, and that's actually like true. That's the one thing. Like if Rodgers understands that, like the Jets have to, Woody has to understand that. Like if Aaron Rodgers is trash early next year, like they're going, I don't know how long you let it go for, but it can't be like the whole season. Like they're going to have to move on and start over, or they're going to set the franchise back multiple more years to where the point like now, if you could, not to be negative, like, but you could just very easily see this 13-year playoff drought going to 20 if they mismanage this and let Rodgers hold on this team last too long.
Hmm.
And I think so that is truly like at stake. And if you see the way all the reactions were this year, and Rodgers also said that on McAfee yesterday, which was interesting. Like if I had been on the team and they had struggled, like he said, the local media is fantastic or whatever. They're fair and they ask tough questions. And I think we have been fair. We have asked him tough questions, even if it's not always about some of the nonsense, non-football stuff he's talking about. Um, but he said, like, if I was on the team and we struggled and lost to Dallas like that, and we were 1-4, like I would have been taking just as much heat as everybody else was, and I'm fine with that because it's football related, and that's true. And it will be even worse next year because it's going to be like you sunk everything into this guy. So I think
Yeah, I
like the
mean, it
fact
better
that
be
he
worth
can
the
see that,
trouble.
yeah,
It better be worth the trouble, right? I mean,
yep,
that's what Jet fans are, all this nonsense. I mean, I guess some people probably agree with some of the insane opinions that he's spewing and just like his insane logic and straw man arguments and false equivalency and all of the just complete conspiratorial nonsense that even Pat McAfee, who is, basically in bed with the guy, was like, enough, right? We're like, he basically cut him off and he's not going to be back for the rest of the year, mercifully, this season. Who knows if he will be in the future. But the Jeff fans got to be looking at this and saying, this is it, this all this nonsense and at least a sensible Jet fan, all this embarrassment is just, let's just like let it pay off with something like some semblance of great success next year. Even if, quite frankly, the entire sporting world in most cases would have been like in most cases of the Jets were going to make a deep run to the Super Bowl. A lot of people would be sentimentally behind it, like the Cubs, right? Rodgers
mm-hmm.
is so unlikable to like the general public, unless you're like an insane person. Like, okay, sorry, but that's the reality. Uh, he's a great player. He's just not a likable guy. Like, and that's fine because look, if we had all these information about Michael Jordan now that we did in the 90s, he would have had a lot fewer fans. Let's just say that.
Yeah,
Okay. All the things that he was doing, and quite frankly, things that are more untoward, quite frankly, than Aaron Rodgers' words. Right? We know this
Yep.
now, the way he was behaving, uncivil and all that. So, like, yeah, I think that he would not have been viewed in the same lens at the time. But yeah, I not that the Jet fan cares if other people around the country are rooting for them or if the team's likable, but I think to bring it back, like even the locker room, right? Like these guys probably see a lot of this BS, and I think it'll be fascinating to see. Like, yeah, they don't really care what he says on McAfee, but once he gets in the locker room, I'll be really interested to see how much accountability he really does take. Because you think back to that last year in Green Bay, and like he wasn't the most accountable guy in the world there, right?
Yeah, and I think that's like he has been in the locker room since the end of November. He's around, he's there. He's been great for the guys to deal with. From a media standpoint, he is at his locker. He is not
He's
going to
not throwing
be.
any picks.
Yeah, and that's where I'm getting to. Like that's why it's hard to kind of highly criticize him from a football standpoint right now, um, because he's been everything like they could have asked for in the locker room. But it doesn't matter until once things go wrong. How is that going to be? And who's he going to throw under the bus? Is it going to be Robert Saleh? Is it going to be the players? Is it going to be the offensive line? Because the history just suggests that he will deflect. And I'm not like I don't think that's being controversial saying that. It's just the way it goes. So it's
I
just
couldn't
more.
even take ownership for essentially calling Jimmy Kimmel a pedophile. Like, I mean, like all he had to do is just say, oh, "Look, I'm my bad, my bad." Has this guy ever, like I'm sure he has. I'm sure he has. But like that, things like that and other things in the past just point to potential for a lack of accountability, and then all the bombs that follow.
Yeah, it's not gonna and it's not gonna fly in here, and it's not gonna fly in the locker room. It's not gonna fly in the New York media because, especially with the Jets and this fan base, because they're just so tired of not just losing, but like just being terrible on offense. So, yeah, the pressure is on to back it up. He's not going to be a soft landing if it's not going well and he's pointing the finger. And I think even though the locker room didn't really, the benefit of him, like the fact that Aaron Rodgers chose the Jets in a lot of ways that like gave guys in the locker room confidence. And I just don't want to overlook that. I do think it's like there's some importance to that. And I think that's why like even though all of that, like they noticed, it was noticed in the locker room this year that this guy's talking more than anybody, even though he's not there. And there was a point in the year where, players were clearly annoyed when they were asked when they were eliminated in Miami, like if it made it even worse because they denied Aaron the chance to get back. And it was like, no, it wasn't about Aaron. It's about us. I mean, I think there was some annoyance even this year
Sure.
without him there for how it went. And I don't think it was a big deal or a distraction, but it was just like, what the hell kind of a thing where it got exhausting. Not just imagine what it would be like if he's not playing well and he is there every day. It's going to be worse next year. So like not worse isn't the right word. It's going to be a completely different experience. So um, I just think like, yeah, it's a loaded, I mean, every year going forward until the Jets are good is going to be a loaded difficult situation for anyone who is in a position of leadership. And then it's I think like when you're a public figure like Rodgers is, it's just another lesson and indicator that like, hey, it's really hard to like sound good when you're talking about anything regularly for an hour a week in a kind of an informal setting. And then when you're talking about loaded comments and walking that line, like it's just really hard for any public figure who is also has a polarizing past to do that. I mean, just look at Robert Saleh and his 4 or 5 media availabilities per week in this loaded kind of situation. It's very easy to make yourself look silly. And Rodgers proves that even if you're like a semi-polished, smartish, I don't think it's easy to call him dumb, but I don't think he's dumb. I just think he's smart, but there's also like, you know, smart in terms of being a football player who can remember a lot of information and then smart socially and knowing how what you say will be perceived and how you act and how it'll be perceived and all that. It's a totally different thing. It's a really hard line to walk. So I think there's a lot of lessons in there. I don't know if Rodgers is, has the humility to take them. But again, like I said before, it's hard for me to be critical of the way he acted because it wasn't like my experience of him being around him was not unpleasant, except for the part where he would go on the radio or on the podcast every week and say things that had nothing to do with anything that was going on in the Jets locker room and make himself a story. It didn't seem like a team first thing to do. So um, it's complicated to kind of frame where Aaron Rodgers is and his relationship with his teammates and the Jets. It's a complicated thing, but again, like we've said this whole time, it's going to come down to results next year, and none of this will fly if Aaron Rodgers is hurt again. Like it's probably over, and all the sideshow stuff will. I think everybody's done with it.
Better produce. Better produce, man. Yeah, I mean, this better be worth it. I mean, they traded a ton for him. They're giving him a lot of money. I know he took the pay cut, but good grief. I mean, you better produce. I mean, I think that was true before any of this stuff, that he went on. I mean, the guy's very smart. I think he thinks incredibly highly of himself and thinks he's the smartest man in the world or whatever. And look, none of it. I mean, the confidence is what made him a great player. And I think that he's not, he's certainly not lacking for that. That has not gone away. The question then becomes, physically, what type of player he is, and can they protect this guy? And so, yeah, we'll see. We'll see. So, yeah, we'll
We
we'll
will.
we'll leave it there.
And
And
I'll just add one more thing that we talk about the kind of player he was.
sure.
Like I've talked to a couple. I mean, there's been stuff out there about Rodgers being the scout team quarterback the last month of the season, and like how he was playing really well at practice, and even us. Like I was at the last practice on Friday. You see Rodgers throwing these bombs with ease. It's like 30 degrees out. It's windy, and he's throwing it into like a 5-by-5 net every time from like 70 yards. I don't know what that means in terms of like next year because so much of it is going to be dependent on him moving, and we didn't see him as a scout team quarterback. So despite everybody saying he looked great, that doesn't mean much to me. But one of the ways it was described to me by somebody on the team, in an off the record setting or in a non attributable setting, was the ultimate tease,
Yeah,
which is like perfect for the Jets. The fact that this guy got close enough to healthy, they can come out there and just light it up in practice every day, and you can't do anything with it. So it's almost frustration, and we're gonna find out if the tease is reality or not. In 9 months again after all this buildup, and it'll be interesting to see.
for sure, for sure. And by the way, your UCF guys are up 6 points, 40 seconds to go at home against Kansas. So
31.7 seconds to go now. Yep,
you're probably
I can't
watching. So
believe
I
it.
was gonna say I'll let you go watch what could be a great court rush, but so yeah, here we are mid-January and the divisional round playoffs or the wild card round of the playoffs rather starting this weekend. And as usual, as has been the case for many years now, most of the time, the Giants and Jets watching from home, but no shortage of things to talk about, obviously, here. Hope everyone enjoyed our chat. I don't know when we'll be back with you. We'll try to do a few of these in the off season and certainly as the news dictates. But thanks everybody for listening. Thanks for listening every week throughout the season. For those of you who did, NJ.com/Jets, NJ.com/Giants. As always, thanks for reading. Be sure to like, rate, review, subscribe, all that good stuff. And we will catch up with you sooner rather than later. Not sure when, but thanks again. Enjoy the rest of your week. Enjoy the games this weekend, and we'll talk to you all soon.